Hello students, today we're going to be talking about strings. We've talked a little bit about strings before, and if you remember we've discussed strings as a data type in Python. We've talked about how strings represent textual information or a collection of characters. The strings are interesting because they represent the first sort of complex data type that we're going to be talking about, the first collection data type. That is to say that strings can be thought of as more than a single simple value. When we talk about an integer, for example, an integer is just one value. It's the number 7 is an example of an integer, and there's nothing more to it than that. Strings are much more complex than that. A string can be thought of as a collection of individual characters. Now, strings have a property that they are immutable. And this is why we can think of them as a normal data type. An immutable object means that once it's created, it can't directly be changed. And the nuances of this aren't important right now. We'll get into those later in the semester. But for right now, remember that strings are immutable, and most of the other data types we'll talk about are going to be mutable data types. Now, you can use a for loop to iterate through any list. So if you remember, we talked about how we can use the range function to create a list of numbers and iterate through the list using a for loop. Because a string is a special type of list, a list of characters, you can use a for loop to iterate through it. So try this code here. You can use a for loop and create a loop variable letter in some string. And remember, the string is enclosed in quotes here. In this case, we would print out each letter in our list in order, and in this case in our string in order. So we would get a capital H on one line, and then on the next we would get a lowercase e, and then a lowercase l, and then another lowercase l, and then a lowercase o, and then a comma, and then a space, and so on and so forth. Now, each character in a string can also be referenced by its index, or by its position in the string. And you can see here how a string is indexed and how each character in the string is indexed. If we have the string, for example, Luther College, which you can see this graphic in your textbook, we always start counting at 0. Strings are 0 indexed, so the first item in the list is always called the 0 index item. And in this case, the first letter is the capital L. And so if we were to reference the 0th index item in our string, it would return the letter L. If we were to reference the 10th item, it would be a lowercase l, because that's what's in the 10th position. Now, you can also use negative numbers as an index, and you can see how that works in the same way on this graphic by counting backwards from the end of the string. So if we were to reference the negative 9th index in this string, we would get a lowercase r. Now, strings can be used with loops, and we talked about how you can iterate through the string directly using a for loop, but you can also use the len function to find the length of a string, which you can then manipulate, or which you can then use to use a range function on the loop. So if you want to modify, for example, every odd letter, or every second or every third letter in a string, you can do that by using the len function to get the total length of the string, and then use a range function to get only specific indices up to that total length. And you can also use the length of a string when you use while loops. We'll discuss while loops, or we talked about while loops last week. Using the correct type of loop is important for proper string manipulation. Sometimes a for loop is the correct type of loop, sometimes you want to use a while loop, and it's important to be able to make that distinction. Now, strings have many methods on them. There are many things you can do with a string, and here are some of the common ones that you'll see. This list can be found in your book and also in the Python documentation. But for example, you can use the upper method in order to turn a string into all uppercase letters. Similarly, you can use the lowercase method to do the same thing with lowercase letters. You can also strip out white space, find and replace substrings within the string, find an item in the string. If you want to find out where the first occurrence of the letter P in the string is, you can do that using the find function, for example. Again, you can find this list in your textbook. Now, one of the powerful things we can do with strings is actually called slicing. We can do slicing to select a substring, or a smaller part of an existing string, using the slice operator. The slice operator uses both the beginning and ending index for the substring, separated by a colon. And it uses this format. We have square brackets representing the index in the string, and we actually have the starting index followed by a colon followed by the ending index. So for example, if we created a string for the text world, we could then use slicing, and pardon my typo here, this should be a colon, but we can reference that string and use 1 and then colon 3, and that would return ORL, because remember, strings are 0 index, so the 0 index is W, the 1 index where we start is O, and we go until the ending index of 3, so 1, 2, 3 is ORL. Now, strings can also be used in comparison with Boolean values, or in the same way we can do, for example, numerical comparison to find a Boolean value. String comparison is done by checking the characters of the string in order, which follows standard alphabetical ordering. So aardvark would appear before apple, and apple would appear before ball. Specifically, the letters of each string are stored as a numeric ordinal value, which is what gets compared. Now, the ordinal values for the numbers fall in order, which allows this sort of standard alphabetical ordering to work. So, for example, I believe the lowercase a is the letter 65, and lowercase b is the letter 60, or has the ordinal character code of 66. And I may be mistaken on those, but it's that sort of pattern. And so A always comes before B, and we can always say that the ordering of strings follows that sort of standard progression. Now, what's interesting about ordinal character codes is that lowercase letters are actually greater than those of uppercase letters. So if we were to look at the two strings apple, one using a lowercase a and one using an uppercase a, the lowercase a would actually be considered the greater string because the lowercase a has a larger ordinal character code than the uppercase a. Python includes a function so you can find the ordinal character code of a character, and you can use that using the ord function and then passing in a single character. Now, we've discussed the accumulator pattern, and you can actually use this with strings in order to manipulate strings. In this case, we're taking a simple string, the word ball, and we're going to iterate through it, and for each letter in the string, we're going to take another string R, which starts as the empty string, and add the letter plus what we've already accumulated there. In this case, what it would do is actually reverse the string as well as put it into all capital letters.